2023 House of Representatives. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Hello teachers, parents, students, and constituents who are here for the food. My name is Sophia Hahn, and I am a graduating senior as well as the president of the Young Democrats Club here at McIntosh High School. The forum tonight has been entirely organized by the students here who are the presidents and vice presidents of the political organizations at our school. These students will also be your questionnaires for tonight.
My name is Lucy Stone. I am a junior here at McIntosh, and I'm the vice president of Young Democrats.
Hello everyone, my name is Eric Lee. I'm the president of McIntosh Republicans.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Spencer Kuhn. I'm vice president of McIntosh Republicans.
My name is Caleb North, and I'm a senior at McIntosh, and I'm the president of the Libertarian Club.
Hi, I'm Jack Salon. I am the vice president of the Libertarian Club.
I have the honor to introduce our Republican candidate, Mr. Philip Singleton, and the Democratic candidates, Mr. Chuck Enderlin and Mr. Rusty Oliver, all of whom will give a quick introduction about themselves.
Hi, I'm Philip Singleton. First, just want to say thank you to everyone for being here, and a huge shout out to McIntosh High School. This should encourage everyone that our democracy is going to be strong in the future. And the largest voting demographic in the United States is 18 to 24 years old. And so, and they're also the least voting demographic in the United States. So stuff like this is an excellent opportunity, and we're really happy that they're doing this. But just very briefly about me, I spent 15 years active duty Army. I'm from Fayette County originally. I married my high school sweetheart. We have 4 kids together. She grew up in Sonoy. I grew up in Fayette County. Joined the Army after September 11th. I joined 9 days after September 11th and traveled the world. I spent 7 of the last 15 years overseas. I served in Germany, Korea, all across the country, 3 combat tours, 5 air medals, and 2 Bronze Stars for combat actions, 2 master's degrees, 1 in aeronautical science and 1 in international relations. I've been trained by the Army in joint strategic planning. And really, I decided to run. God called me a couple years back, told me that we need more veterans in Congress, and was really calling me to serve in a different way. And swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And over the last couple of years, it's just become apparent to me that the greatest threat to our Constitution is domestic, it's not foreign. And so through many years of prayer, we decided to move back last year, leaving South Korea. So it was very, very, very good to come home. And we've been running for Congress since then, and we're just really honored to be here and happy to talk to you guys.
Good evening.
Please hold all applause for that, right?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the students of McIntosh for organizing this. I'm Chuck Enderlin, and I'm the next congressman from Georgia's 3rd Congressional District. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, the son of a small business owner and health educator. And my parents taught my sister and I 2 key values growing up. They taught us to work hard, and they taught us to help other people. And those values didn't just drive me to success at high school, at the Naval Academy, and through my career as a Marine officer. They imbued me with a sense of empathy, and importantly, a drive for servant leadership. And that servant leadership is something that we're missing today, as too many of our representatives have forgotten that they have a responsibility to their constituents. And we need strong servant leaders in Congress, because there are a lot of problems that we see facing us, and that if we come together, we can actually solve the problems of them. None of us want our children going to school under the threat of gun violence, and we can fix that by bringing principles that Philip and I shared in the armed forces and bringing safety and responsibility into our national weapons culture. None of us want to break our promises to our veterans, and we can do that by electing veterans who will fund the VA at 100% and resist efforts to privatize it. None of us want a health care system where costs are outpacing our incomes, and we can fix that by instituting a public option to purchase Medicare, freeing people from employee-sponsored health insurance, and making sure we all have health coverage that is usable and affordable. And all of us want our economy roaring. And we can do that by raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour and tying it to inflation, opening new markets, and unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit of America that will guide us to leadership in the coming century. These will all take electing good, strong servant leaders. So take a look tonight. You have 3 in front of you. Take a look at the rest of the candidates. Pull the ballot for the party of your choice and vote. Election day is Tuesday, May 22nd. Early voting goes through Friday. And if you pull a Democratic ballot, vote for Chuck Enderlin for United States Congress. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Rusty Oliver, and I'm a high school science teacher. I have lived and worked and taught for the 3rd District for 22 years. This is not my first time at McIntosh High School. I also coach girls soccer down at Columbus High School. Those of you that are familiar with soccer in this area know that the culture around here revolves a little bit around soccer. Unfortunately, my team lost to McIntosh a few years ago, so maybe that'll win me a vote or two tonight. But as a career educator, I need to remind some people up here on the stage that we have a few elections before anyone can declare themselves a representative of this district. Now, observably absent is the incumbent right now, and we're all running to displace him. So we need to elect someone who is a viable candidate who will truly represent us in Washington. Who's going to be that candidate? It's going to be someone that has lived in this state their entire life. It's going to be someone who has already served this district for 22 years. And with that knowledge, I can take that to Washington, represent us, come back and hold what are called town halls, things that people that are elected now seem to neglect, hold my feet to the fire, be responsible for the votes I cast and the legislation I write, and then go back to Washington based on the input from constituents. I'm not running for me, I'm running for you and the people of this district, my neighbors, my co-workers, my former students of 22 years. Thank you for McIntosh hosting this event tonight, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. We also have a message from the other Republican candidate and incumbent, Mr. Drew Ferguson, who was unfortunately unable to make it tonight.
I'm Drew Ferguson, and I'm running for re-election to continue serving the 3rd District of Georgia. I'm sorry I can't be with you tonight, but I'm in Washington, D.C., fulfilling my constitutional duty to cast votes and participate in our legislative process. I want to congratulate all the students who have put this event together. It's always encouraging to see young people getting involved in their communities and working to serve others. I urge everyone here to continue looking for ways to help their fellow man, whether it's through organizing events like this or volunteering in your community. When you sent me to Congress, I promised that I would make America the best place in the world to do business. Working with the Trump administration, we have rolled back burdensome regulations and passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to finally help American business be competitive on the global stage. And we are already seeing the positive benefits in the 3rd District. Local businesses like Aflac, Southwire, and Total System Services are investing in their workers and communities, and Georgians are seeing more money back in their paychecks. We're blessed to be leading the way here in the 3rd District, changing mindsets in education through college and career academies, the technical college system, and partnerships with industry. We're beginning to prepare young people for successful careers. Whether students are looking for a traditional 4-year college or a career technical education program, I have worked to make it easier for them to prepare for these 21st century careers. But we still have a lot of work to do. Our budget process is broken, and the process has been broken for a long time. It has led to $21 trillion in debt, and this debt threatens not only your future, but future generations. We can solve this problem, but we have to come together and we have to create a realistic budget process that gets our nation back on a path to fiscal health. If we do that, we will be able to keep the promises that have been made and defend our nation and protect the freedoms that you hold so dearly. I look forward to continuing to serving you in this role in the 3rd District of Georgia.
Thank you, Congressman Ferguson. After the the form, we will follow with a 20-minute Q&A session with the audience. Then we will end our forum with a meet and greet with the candidates in front of the auditorium where we have refreshments as well. Thank you for your time, and please welcome Mr. Keenest, our moderator tonight.
Hello, I'm Mark Keenest. I'm a social studies teacher here at McIntosh High School, and I'm also the sponsor of Young Democrats. Wonderful to see all these students getting together questions. Just want to outline a few things with the candidates. What we're going to be doing is the students are going to be asking questions of the individual candidates. The individual candidates will have 2 minutes to respond. Candidates, I'll give you a 15-second time warning as you approach the 2-minute mark. And then they're going to get a chance, the individual candidates that didn't answer the question will have a 1-minute rebuttal. So if they want to rebut the answers of the individual candidate, they may do so. We are going to start with Mr. Singleton, then we'll go to Mr. Ender, and then we'll go to Mr. Oliver. So Young Democrats, I believe that you're asking the first question.
The World Health Organization has ranked the U.S. as 37th in the United Nations in healthcare functionality. How do you, as congressman, would you plan on improving this statistic?
Healthcare. Perfect, easy question. Do I get 4 minutes for the Republican candidates? So the healthcare issue, we've talked about that a lot. Right now, the healthcare, there's a huge push for socialized medicine in the United States. We've gone back, we're back full cycle again to what we were in the early 2000s, 2009. There was a big push for opening up Medicare for all, but a buy-in option, like I know you're going to hear about today. My approach to solving the healthcare issue is one issue at a time, one problem. So the Republicans that were elected last term, including my opponent, they all ran on a promise for complete repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And they didn't promise any sort of replacement. They just promised for complete repeal, kind of a hard reset. They completely failed at meeting that obligation. But what we have learned over the last 6 to 8 years is there are significant issues with the Affordable Care Act, like the HIT tax is my favorite one to talk about because there are people in the audience that have actually dealt with the HIT tax. It's a great example of something that's broken. The HIT tax, for those who don't know, is when they passed the Affordable Care Act, the 2,300 pages that no one had read. There's a tax in there that takes a private business owner and they have to pay $200 for every employee that they give health care to the exchange. It was an unintended tax then on every employer for $200. And the Democrats rapidly admitted as well that it wasn't intended, it was an administrative fee. And the Republicans came out and said that they disagree with it too. Well, the problem is with the full Republican House and the full Republican Congress. So they've come out and my opponent as well, and they essentially said they don't want to fix those issues because they want to make the Affordable Care Act as painful as possible on every American so that they can use that as a method of re-election and of solidifying their base. That is not the leadership that I believe in. And so what I'm going to do when I'm in Washington is one-page bills that can solve those problems. I'm assuming that alarm is me. Solve the plan.
That is.
You want to just keep going?
Yes, please.
So one of the easiest things we can do to fix our healthcare system is to open up Medicare for purchase as a public option. This will be similar to a program that I enjoy right now called TRICARE Reserve. It's essentially a government contracted health insurance plan, and it's fantastic. Without TRICARE, I wouldn't have my children because of the hospital bills that we racked up with our pregnancy, and I wouldn't have the comfort of knowing that I could just go to the hospital if I need to, if my wife and my children are sick, and not worry about bills. We're seeing rates increase dramatically. Maryland has asked for a 90% increase. In Georgia, it's worse. They can just raise the rates if they want to. So many of our counties only have one or no providers, one or no hospitals. And if we want to keep our hospitals open, and if we want to keep our doctors paid, the fastest, most effective, and free market solution we can bring is a public option to purchase Medicare.
Can you repeat the question?
I said the World Health Organization has ranked the United States as 37th in the United Nations as in healthcare functionality. we were wondering if, as Congressman, how you would plan on fixing that.
Okay, so I just wanted to ensure. Unlike, again, the ever-morphing platforms of some of my opponents, I have, from day one, said that we need a universal healthcare system that covers every single American in this country from birth to death. If we can afford burdening your generation with a $1.5 trillion deficit, we can afford health care for every single person in this nation. The World Health Organization looks at things globally, so this is a global issue as well. And so we need to look at the fact that climate destabilization is also affecting global health. This is not just the United States problem, this is a global problem. But first and foremost, we need to ensure that every American in this country is covered, again, from birth to death, without fear of losing their house, without losing their job, without fear of pre-existing conditions. I had the misfortune of 2 years ago experiencing this firsthand. I had 3 spinal surgeries, 1 was routine, 2 were emergency, and without health care, my bills would have added up to over $500,000. I doubt that few in this room could have afforded those bills without health insurance. This administration wantonly kicked off tens of millions of people as soon as they came into office. That is wrong. Health care is not an entitlement. Health care is something that this government should provide for every single American in this nation. Thank you.
Can I rebut?
Absolutely.
All right, so I know I only get a minute, so I'm going to spend 30 seconds on each one. I'll do the best I can. Okay, socialized medicine is not going to work in the United States. So the Department of Veterans Affairs, they're going to campaign later, and I'm sure you've heard before about how we need to fix the VA. The VA, by the way, is a 100% socialized medicine system. It's the only one in the United States, and it's the largest one. By the way, it's the second largest department in the United States, next to the Department of Defense only. We spend $320 million a year providing health care to 7 million veterans. Okay, those are the numbers. If we were, and it's fully socialized, in other words, every doctor, every nurse, every administrator, and every facility is 100% government run and government funded. It is a socialized medicine system. Okay, the VA, if you take those same numbers, and we spent that same $320 million over those 7 million that are taken care of, and we apply that to the $180 billion budget. I apologize. And we apply that, it would cost us over $8.2 trillion to do that same system for every American. 8.2 trillion. And those who don't know, that's literally twice our entire federal budget right now. And that's if we go to a socialized medicine system. So that's why you never hear a reason or an explanation of how we're going to pay for it, because no one knows how it's going to happen, because right now it's physically impossible. And then I'll respond to him at the different points. I'm out of time.
If we're going to talk about the VA, let's make sure that we keep our promises to our veterans. They went off to war, they've come back home, and it's time for us to pay them back for their sacrifices. If we're not willing to do that, we shouldn't be on this stage. But back to the main issue of how we can fix healthcare in our country. I could lie to you. I could tell you that President Trump or possibly President Pence will sign a bill for Medicare for all, but that's not going to happen. But in the next 2 years, what we can do is we can work across the aisle with Republicans. We can get them to sign solutions that work with America, that work with our entrepreneurial spirit, and that harness that innovative power that we have. That's what a Medicare buy-in does. And if we're scared of that, let's take Trump here. Use that as a model. Apply that to the country and allow everyone to have a great health care system. If Affleck can beat it, great. They'll beat it. And if they can't, what we'll see is everybody buying into Medicare.
Several things. First of all, the Affordable Care Act is broken because the current administration is trying to undermine it with every single piece of legislation they pass, even down to the Farm Bill. It's not going to work when the government is working to kill it, which Mr. Singleton freely admitted that they're trying to kill. This term socialized medicine, again, we need to avoid these catchwords that seem to have a negative connotation when the Republicans think they're bad, and we just don't use them when they're good. Would we want our fire departments or police department not quote-unquote socialized? I don't think so. And then, again, now we've morphed to a Medicare buy-in program, which is going to cut into the Medicare Trust Fund, and the AARP has already said that that's something that they're not willing to support. Thank you.
Good. 5 seconds. Sure. Thank you. The Medicare buy-in as outlined in Bernie Sanders' healthcare bill is paid for by taking the Medicare expenditure, dividing it by the user.
So, I'm going to take 15 seconds. So, in all fairness,
control.
and I didn't really get to respond to his because they are two different things that they're talking about. Okay, notice how he said this is how we pay for it. Right? So when you start talking about having to pay for the Medicare buy-in option, it's just further evidence, it's evidentiary that it's not a free market system. So it's a subsidized system. So the problem when you talk about the Medicare buy-in in 2009, the CBO did an estimate on it, and they said that without government subsidy, it would be more expensive for every user if they went to a Medicare buy-in option. Now they've redone it in the last year. They did a new assessment and said it would be cheaper if it was subsidized. The problem is what the real intent behind the socialized buy-in is that the private market, and I'm almost done, I promise, the private market cannot compete with a subsidized market. And so what it does is it drives individual companies out of the private market, which ultimately leads to, guess what? The only one left that can provide health care is the Medicare, and it leads to a Medicare for all, which is what Bernie Sanders has defended as his end state. So really the socialized option is just an attempt to try to get to a long-term socialized Medicare system.
I'll follow the rules, they will.
Absolutely.
So I won't make another comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, our young Republicans are going to ask the next question.
Recently, the Trump administration has faced criticism for its plans to withdraw the Dreamers program, and we've seen a lot of backlash. So my question is, should Dreamers be given protection from deportation, or should they be given amnesty and a quicker path to citizenship?
And we're going to start this time with Mr. Oliver.
Plain and simple, yes, we need a clean DACA Act. It was presented to a bipartisan committee. President Trump said, bring me whatever legislation you all agree on and I'll sign it and I'll take the heat for it. They did, he didn't. I've had the privilege of meeting Dreamers as I've traveled over the 13 counties of this district, and they're scared. So one of the first pieces of legislation I'll be proud to write or sponsor if someone writes it before I do will be a clean DACA Act, a pathway to citizenship for everyone in this country that comes to contribute and will, just like my ancestors did, and again, I would bet that few of us have ancestors that were born in this country. Just like my ancestors were given a pathway to citizenship, we should not deny that from the people that are here today.
So we need a large-scale reform of our immigration system. It goes beyond just taking care of the Dreamers. Those are, of course, people who come here, brought here by their parents, and for many of them, the United States is the only country they know. We absolutely have an obligation to make sure that they are allowed to stay in this country. Many of them are in high school and college or in the military, contributing and living the American dream, making us a better country with their diversity. We have an obligation to accept them and integrate them into our society. But it goes beyond that. For anyone who wants to come to this country, we have an obligation to welcome them. It's part of our values. It's who we are as a country. And if we were to close that door and put up obstacles, it destroys the American promise and betrays us. Right now, for someone who wants to bring in a family member from Mexico and get that critical support they need moving and living in a new country, it's about a 10-year wait on paper. In reality, due to the backlog and the increasing number of applicants, it's closer to a 100-year wait for someone to come into this country legally. That needs to change. We need to modify our immigration system so that if you come here and you are contributing, either through going to college, joining the military, or just staying out of trouble and working hard, you have 5 years, and then we will grant you citizenship, because you're here to stay at that point. People want to come to the United States. That's what makes us the greatest country on earth. And that diversity that they bring is what gives us our strength. When we have leaders like John Kelly making demeaning comments about immigrants, it insults all of us. I know when my family came over, we probably didn't speak more than the German they knew from back home or the Swiss they knew back home. But they came to America. They learned new languages. They worked hard to integrate into our culture. And they raised great families that have become a part of the American fabric, and we need to continue that with our immigrants today.
So I agree with most of what my opponents said. I agree with them philosophically, and I agree with them about DACA. They take it further than I would take it when they start talking about amnesty and they start talking about open borders, which is the official Democrat platform. I know that neither of them said open borders, but that's the official Democrat platform. So I agree with the president. He's getting flack from both parties right now for it, but he actually wants a clean DACA bill as well. It was attached as a rider to the budget process, which is why it didn't get passed. But the Republicans and the Democrats wouldn't pass a clean one. So those members that wanted to be a part of DACA, I agree with the president. He came out and said, I am for allowing DACA, those that had of no fault of their own came here and want legal immigration status and signed up and they want to pay taxes and they want to have a driver's license and they want to be legal citizens. He's for half of that. But he also was against to executive overreach and the use of an executive order to do something that should have been done constitutionally by the Congress. And so he was right to get rid of the executive order and put the ball in Congress's court. And I know you do have 3 candidates up here that would not shy away from doing their congressional responsibility and putting legislation together for it. And really that's what a lot of this stuff is going to boil down to tonight is that our Congress has failed us miserably. You've got about a 16% approval rating and a 98% re-election rating. And our Congress has failed their Article 1, Section 8 responsibilities, and that is one of them that's explicit. In Article 1, Section 8, they have the responsibility to make sure we do that kind of legislation. Going to war is another one, passing the budget is another one. All the things that Article 1, Section 8 says that they're responsible to do, it seems like they avoid it. And then everything that the 10th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and other things say they're not supposed to do, that's what we all talk about them doing all the time. And it's highly frustrating. But my stance as the Republican Party is the party of legal immigration. We're pro-legal immigration, but we want to do it by making sure that we de-incentivize illegal immigration by following the laws, closing the borders, getting rid of chain migration, and making sure that we do it right and we treat legal immigrants correctly.
Mr. Oliver, you have a chance to rebut.
Again, the question was posed that President Trump offered this gracious invitation to people to come to our country while a caravan of people escaping persecution in South America were moving through Mexico while he went out and window shopped wall designs, not exactly inviting to people to come into this country. And again, we hear a term that is useful for the Republican Party when it applies to things that they don't agree with. Chain migration. The better term is family reunification. Melania Trump's parents, if we want to talk about it, were brought here via chain migration. So let's not cloud the issues with rhetoric and terms like open borders, where we send out invitations to anyone carrying a gun from another country to come into this country and wreak havoc.
So if the Republicans in Congress wanted a clean DACA bill, they could bring one to the floor. They control the House, they control the Senate, they control the presidency. There is no reason that you can, or no way to blame Democrats for Republicans' refusal to actually do the work that needs to be done. And like I said, we have an obligation to welcome immigrants, to welcome people who want to come to our country. We have a great organization that can vet those and make sure that we don't have terrorists coming in, to make sure that handful, that very minute percentage of truly bad people don't make it in. But the majority of people that come here are fleeing. They're coming for a chance at a better life. They're coming for the possibility of lifting themselves up and lifting their children up through nothing more than hard work and the character that they have. That's the American promise, and that's something that we need to continue.
So true. I mean, that's true. What he said was the Republicans could pass it if they wanted to, and they chose not to. Unfortunately for him, he's running against me, not running against the Republicans in Washington. So that, it matters what I say, not what the Republicans are doing in the establishment. Now, my opponent has voted 100% of the time, and I mean, Drew Ferguson has voted 100% of the time with the Republican establishment. So, you might be able to use that again. Hopefully not, but you might be able to use that again. And I don't believe that I've thrown any generic platitudes out there. The open borders is in the DNC platform, it's not mine. So I agree, we got to avoid the platitudes and just the baseless bashing of people that aren't here. Let's talk about the bashing issues. So that's all I have.
All right, this time we are going to let Mr. Enderlin go first, then Mr. Singleton, then Mr. Oliver, and we are going to have our young libertarians ask the question.
The U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, favors the privatization of schools. Do you agree with her vision for students?
No, I do not. I favor strong public education, and we need strong public education. And strong public education takes strong national policy. As we go around this district and we talk to educators, we talk to parents, and we talk to the students who are there, we hear a lot of the same problems. We hear, hey, we have students who don't get more than just a one meal at school that they have. We have educators and administrators saying, we're terrified that we're going to lose our funding due to private school vouchers. We have parents wondering what they can do with their children when they're having to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. And now they have to take care of before and after school care. Strong leadership at the federal level can fix this. We need to increase our Title I funding, which provides for those facilities, can help provide for before and after school care. We need to expand the Community Exception Program, which provides free lunch meals, no questions asked for students. We need to go beyond that, though. We need to expand our school lunch program so that any student can get breakfast, lunch, or dinner if they need it, or all three. This would free up students not just to have a strong environment they need to learn, but it would allow those parents the ability to take just a little bit of stress out of their lives, to not maybe have to run around working 2 jobs, juggling childcare, and everything else that goes along with it. And these strong community bonds are what strengthen our communities. Making the schools the center of our communities again is something that will bring in tremendous benefits to our society. If we want that to happen, though, we have to invest in public education. We have to invest in our teachers. We need a federal match on teacher salaries to raise salaries up so that teaching is a viable career field for anybody, not just those who feel a particular calling for it. We need to make sure that our schools, our counseling facilities are built next to each other so that our school administrators have the resources they need and they can build the strong communities.
Mr. Singleton?
And I feel more broke already. We spend the fifth. We spend the 5th most per capita per child of any nation in the world on education. And we've proven statistically that the amount of money you spend per child is not only not corollary, but it's also not causal to the quality of the education. We have amazing education where we live here. We have amazing schools like this one, and we're doing very well. But I fully support their concept of privatization where we can, but only so much as it encourages competition and it allows local control to the highest extent possible for our school systems. I believe the teachers, even the ones that I disagree with, I believe the teachers need to have as much control as possible over the education of the students that they're doing. And I don't believe that the cookie cutter methodology has been proven successful over the last 20 years in our education system. I want the local teachers deciding what equipment they need and what changes they need to the curriculum and making sure that we get the federal government out of their way to the extent that they need and that they request. I don't need 2 minutes.
Betsy DeVos is a disgrace to the education system in this nation. Just like many cabinet appointments, she is opposed to what she is supposed to be an advocate of. She knows nothing about public education. As a classroom teacher, I can freely say that I have the best grasp of anyone running in this race about what happens in Washington that trickles down to the classroom teacher. I've been doing this for 22 years. And I would challenge anyone in this room to say that anything should be a higher priority than the education of our children. I am proud to say that of the 6 congressional candidates in Georgia running for office that have been endorsed by the National Education Association, I am the one sitting at this table and the only one in this state that is not already in office. That comes from statewide nomination and then a vote in Washington, D.C. So the largest union in the nation, the teachers union, has endorsed me as a candidate. And again, 22 years classroom experience. No one is going to be able to take that knowledge that background that I have to Washington and establish a foundation for everything that will follow in terms of education. Thank you.
So it's great that you've been teaching for 22 years, but even just last night in Griffin, you told us that you had never felt the impact of federal legislation in your classroom. To say that you have a keen grasp on policy and to say that the millions of dollars in Title I funding has never been felt by you is just an indicator that your eyes have been closed. But let's get back to policy, because that's what we can do in Congress. We need to increase Title I funding. We need to help with teacher pay. We need to make sure that our children are fed. If we want to secure our schools, it's going to take an investment. If we are worried that we're spending too much on education, let's take a look at some of the coaches' salaries. Let's get back to the focus on what our schools should be, and that's education, not athletics.
I exceed 45 seconds of my minutes in the gentleman at the end of the table.
We can easily go back and look at a tape, and I'm not going to argue about whether federal dollars have never been felt in my classroom. So I've been misquoted, and I will leave it at that. Again, to simply say that anyone sitting at this table, I challenge them to go toe-to-toe with me about education in this state where I have lived and taught for 22 years.
My 15 seconds, I'll say, the 10th Amendment is pretty clear, so anything that's not explicitly Article 1, Section 8 talks about, the 10th Amendment says that it should be left to the states and then to the local government. And the Constitution doesn't talk about education. So I'm always taking a very hard look at any time we're doing something that's outside of the Constitution. Education is important and something that we need to take care of. I do not advocate abolishing the Department of Education, right? But I do think that we need to take a serious look at it and look at the intent of our founding fathers, and we need to drive those decisions and the flow of that money down as low as we can to the local level.
All right, I think we'll move on to our next topic. We're going to go back to Young Republicans, and they're going to ask a question. We're going to go back to the original order, so Mr. Singleton, Mr. Enderlin, and then Mr. Oliver.
Sir.
All right. This will be a shift for the concrete jobs sector. I believe Mr. Enderlin briefly mentioned this in the opening. Assuming you are elected to the Congress, would you be in favor of supporting or introducing legislation increasing the federal minimum wage?
Okay. No.
Okay. Yes, I would. We need to raise the federal minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. We need to tie it to inflation, and we need to make sure that any American who is working full-time has the resources they need to keep a roof over their head, to keep the lights on, and to keep food on their table for their families. Now, this isn't just an economic idea. It's a moral obligation. If we're going to say that you can raise a family and better yourself through hard work and character, we need to make sure that they have the means to do that. And a higher minimum wage is the way to do that. You can get rid of the tipped minimum wage as well, ensuring that our single moms who are overwhelmingly working in those tipped jobs have an ability to pull themselves up and to build a better life for themselves. Now, this isn't going to be something that's easy to do. When you go down to counties like Harris County or Upson County, they're going to need some federal help to do this. We have a lot of good, very efficient federal programs that can help with that. So the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, is a great example of that that we can use. But we also need to relook at the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed that Mr. Ferguson is oh so proud of, because he gave corporations a permanent tax cut. Those need to go away. And he gave the rest of us a payday loan with a temporary tax cut that's not tied to inflation and that completely disappears after 10 years. We need to make those middle-class tax cuts permanent, and we can do that. If we want to help balance the budget, we can do that too by asking those at the very top of the income scale, that top 0.1%, to finally pay their fair share for the benefits that they have enjoyed so much in this country. If we do this, if we start from the bottom up instead of from the top down, we can build an economy that is robust, strong, innovative, and leads the world.
I have pledged and signed a piece of legislation, a package of legislation called the Contract for American Renewal, one of the tenets of which is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The people of this nation need a way to provide for their families when they graduate from high school. And again, we need to tie that back to education. We need to get away from the mentality that everyone that graduates from high school must go to a 4-year college degree program in order to be a success in this life. As jobs evolve, as technology evolves, there will be new jobs being created that we don't even have the foresight to comprehend, just as technology evolves. So if we tie education to technology, to building our infrastructure where there are millions of federal jobs available, we can not only raise the minimum wage, but we can ensure that jobs will be available to millions of people in this country that want to work.
Look, there's a reason I just said no. I wasn't trying to be snide or coy, but because you can hear from their answers that it becomes a very emotional subject, and they put emotion into it all. The bottom line is, if you look at North Friedman, Austrian economics is a successful economic model, and Kinsey doesn't work. And the problem with minimum wage is inflation follows it. And so when you talk about minimum wage, you go to Harris County or some of our rural counties, the businesses there can't afford that minimum wage, and that's when you have to start talking about government supplementation of the minimum wage, as if for some reason this will be the one area that our government is very responsive and proactive and is good at staying on top of what the appropriate wage should be. And I really do wish that it worked that way, but it just doesn't work that way. And, I mentioned stuff like SNAP. SNAP is an excellent program that he talks about all the time that is extremely inefficiently run, and while the intent is very good behind it, there are 33 now states that have a partial or full waivers, so that there's no work requirement as the federal law requires for SNAP. And the average, over 50% of recipients of SNAP have been on the program, the food stamp program, over 8.5 years. It is not a temporary program as it was designed. And so you just have to be able to look at the full thing and take the emotion out of it and realize that as legislators, we have to do the hard rights, and we have to make sure that we're teaching people to fish and we're helping them be successful without intervening inappropriately.
So the federal SNAP program is actually the most efficient federal program that we have. It has the lowest fraud rate of any single federal program in existence. More so though, it is a great economic booster. We talked about the Austrian theory and the Keynesian theories of economics. For those of you who don't know, the Austrian theory is the idea that if you're not selling enough PlayStations, the solution is to put more PlayStations on the shelves. Keynesian theory says if you're not selling enough PlayStations, it's because the people don't have the money to actually buy the PlayStations. SNAP, for every dollar we spend, generates $1.70 of economic impact. It works great because Keynesian economics work. Demand side economics work. We've tried supply side economics. Paul Ryan has been the prophet of supply side economics, and he finally got to implement his big deal this year. And as I'm sure we've all felt from that about $30 increase in our tax cuts, that supply side economics just doesn't work.
So just to rebut real quick there's no factual evidence that the $1.70, and I've seen numbers that are different than that, but I'm not arguing where sources are, but it doesn't mean that it's, that would be generated otherwise. And the point of SNAP is to get people off of the welfare system, and that's their stated intent. Even if you go to their website, Maine was the first state that got rid of that, started making them do the work program. They got rid of their waiver, and within the first year, 80% of the SNAP recipients were off of the program completely, because they got rid of that program. So it has to be managed correctly.
Mr. Oliver?
I'll just reemphasize, we have tremendous infrastructure problems in this nation, and that is a beginning place to provide federal jobs. It's not a handout. It's providing jobs for infrastructure that is needed in this nation. And we can pay the people that can go out and rebuild our infrastructure, and again, create infrastructure that doesn't even exist yet. Piezoelectric highways, solar paneled highways. These are things that are in the future. I don't have the ability to do that. My fellow economists up here, they may be able to do that, but I'm a science teacher with a science background, and I don't have the know-how to go out and perform those jobs. The job market is there. The future is there. And again, we have to pay people an appropriate wage to do those jobs.
All right, we're going to move on. We're going to go back to the Young Libertarians, so with their question. And we are going to go in this order. We're going to let Mr. Oliver speak first, then Mr. Enderlin, and then Mr. Singleton.
Are you in favor of the Trump agenda, which includes a border wall and trade tariffs?
Wow, that's a lot. I strongly oppose the border wall. I'm an environmentalist. I also believe in the eminent domain. So the border wall, as he envisions it and has sold it to his base, is, as I said, as he was window shopping, a massive structure that stretches all the way across the southern border. It cannot be done without destroying the environment, without infringing on the eminent domain of the private landholders that live along the border. It also will infringe on the public lands, which are millions of acres that belong to everyone sitting in this room. If we want to secure our borders, make them less scary, we can secure our borders with things like drones and technology, with people sitting safely in an air-conditioned room flying drones over, if that is the goal. I'm sorry, you said border wall and what else? Trade tariffs. Trade tariffs are hurting Georgia farmers right now. I spoke with a person last night in Griffin. You can check the tape as far as my conversation with her. They have soybean futures up north, and they are already experiencing a loss just from the talk of these trade tariffs that have not even been implemented yet. So there are casualties in a trade war. It's rhetoric. It is nothing but words to stir up the base, isolate us more, and with pulling out of the JCPOA, now the president is talking about imposing tariffs on our European allies. So staunchly, no, I do not support a border wall as envisioned by President Trump, and I'm opposed to this trade war that he wants to create.
The border wall does nothing but waste money. It doesn't make us any safer. It sends the wrong message, and it would not be effective if your goal was to actually reduce immigration. But let's talk about something that actually has had an impact, and that is the tariffs. It's more than just rhetoric. It is actual policy that is having impacts on people. Like Mr. Oliver said, soybean farmers are feeling the crunch right now. We're seeing it affect our relationships with our friendly neighbors, with our adversarial neighbors, and we're pulling out of treaty agreements in ways that are disruptive and destructive to our national interests. Mr. Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was then promptly reconvened by China without the United States interest and reorganized so that it could be China-centric. Unsurprisingly, the Department of State now wants to get back in on that since we messed up that negotiation pretty strongly. We're trying to do the same thing on NAFTA and completely mess up that trade deal that has come to us. And we need trade between our allies. We need to be able to move those goods and services around. Like it or not, we are in a global economy. And we need to harness the efficiencies that come from that to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit. But what Mr. Trump is doing right now is simply destructive. Tariffs never hurt the people in power of the countries they are levied against. They only hurt the workers, the farmers, the steel mill workers, and everyone else who had absolutely no role in deciding the tariffs, but they pay the price. That needs to end, and it will end when we elect Democrats in Congress.
Okay, so we have to secure our borders. I wasn't a teacher for 22 years, but I have formed the border between North and South Korea. I have secured the border in Southeast Afghanistan. And securing the border is an extremely complex and difficult task. A border wall, they are correct, is not sufficient in and of itself. There's a lot more that goes into securing the borders than just the wall. A wall does assist with flow and security purposes, but there's a lot more to go into the border. So I do support securing the border. As far as the tariffs go, I just want to correct one of the guys up here. The president does not have the authority constitutionally to pull out of a treaty. That's an issue with some of the things that happened. They weren't actually treaties; they were executive orders and they were agreements, which he has canceled those agreements because the Senate did not ratify the treaty as they were supposed to. The president doesn't have that authority constitutionally that belongs to the Senate. So while I do appreciate the indignation, we need to make sure we focus on what belongs, which is in the U.S. Senate. As far as the trade wars that's going on right now, first of all, we haven't actually seen a trade war, and I'm pretty sure that the President and the White House staff, I'm not here to defend them, I don't know why I feel like they're under attack, but they have not said anything about a trade war, they don't believe that, but the President, his economic plan right now is to give us the footing to negotiate international agreements because we have very bad agreements that are hurting Americans in the long term. And so while there probably are some significant short-term effects, the long term is we have been negotiating, and they have been very successful, that no one will talk about in the media, at renegotiating several treaties. Just one more fact-finding thing, the Trans-Pacific Partnership was primarily seed money over $100 billion from China anyway. It's always been a primary China organization. The TPP is not an organization that we were planning on being in, and there was no treaty that was established.
Mr. Oliver, if you'd like to vote.
I just respectfully disagree with Mr. Singleton that I have heard the President quote that he wants to be involved in a trade war. And today we found out, this week we found out that the President is more concerned with saving Chinese jobs and Chinese electronics companies than are in.
So I apologize if I misspoke about the Trans-Pacific Partnership being a treaty instead of an agreement. However, I was taught early on that you can never delegate the responsibility you share as a leader or as a commander. In that sense, President Trump is fully responsible for the effects of withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. The buck stops there. What we have to do now is, if we don't like where this is going, if we don't like where that buck is stopping, we have to elect a counterweight. We have to elect Democrats in the United States House and the United States Senate to make sure that we do not haphazardly pull out of the trade agreements that we have that are so valuable and in our national interest.
Yeah, so my only rebut to that is, it was a great question, by the way, but when you talk about campaigning, be very careful when you're listening to what candidates are responding, because we have to understand what authority we actually have as a U.S. Congressman and what authority doesn't belong to us. And so we may say things that sound really good to you and you get emotionally stirred by them, but if they're not something that you can affect as a U.S. Congressman, such as presidential executive power or treaty negotiation, just understand where we can and can't affect.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to our last Democratic question, Young Democrats. And we will be going, Mr. Enderlin will be answering first, then Mr. Singleton, and then Mr. Oliver.
I'd like to switch to a hot topic both in the community and here at our school. Given concerns about gun violence in schools, as a U.S. Congressman, what solutions would you propose to deal with this issue?
So, as a United States Marine, I'm uniquely qualified to talk about weapons safety. I was a weapons instructor at the Naval Academy, teaching incoming midshipmen how to shoot the M9 pistol, an expert pistol shot, an expert rifle shot. I've sent thousands of rounds downrange. In all of that time, I haven't had a misfire. I haven't had an accident. It's because I was taught very, very early on that weapons ownership and usage is a responsibility to safety, safe employment, and accurate usage. What we can do is a two-pronged approach. First, we need to bring that culture of safety and responsibility into our national gun culture. If you want to buy a weapon, you need to have training on it. You need to make sure you know how to carry it safely, how to use it safely, how to make sure you hit what you're aiming for, and how to store it so it cannot be stolen from you. We need to couple that, though, with universal background checks on weapons to make sure that people who shouldn't be buying guns don't buy guns. We need to couple that with increased mental health care. Part of the Public Option to Purchase Medicare will help with that. But we need to make sure that we screen people, just like we do in the military, to make sure that those who shouldn't have weapons don't have access to weapons. And we need to make sure that we put purchase age requirements and mandatory waiting periods on weapons purchases. This will reduce those emotional states where people go and purchase a weapon and then immediately use it in a crime. And it'll restore a little bit of balance. Right now, buying a weapon is easier than buying a car. It shouldn't be that way. Owning a weapon should be a responsibility. This doesn't infringe on rights. This allows you to use your weapons. It allows you to go hunt. It allows you to protect your families if you need to. But most importantly, it makes sure that we do not have accidental fires. We do not have people that can steal weapons, take them into schools, and to make sure that we can actually reduce the gun violence at the source.
Mr. Singleton.
Yeah, good topic. At least you picked the easy one. Okay, so the Second Amendment is a right that's guaranteed by the Constitution. We do have a responsibility to make sure that we do things safely and responsibly. Most of the things that Chuck just talked about are in the current law. Most of those exist. There's a national registry. Unfortunately, there are a lot of loopholes in the registry. For example, states are reporting it. They're reporting about 60% of the state of Georgia. I think it's less than that. Reporting to the federal registry to make sure that you don't cross borders and someone who's already a flagged felon or someone that has mental disorders can purchase a firearm. So I completely agree with him on common sense gun legislation that does not infringe on your Second Amendment rights. And right now it is enforcing the laws that already exist and making sure the systems are better. But as a soldier too, I'm also well trained in the weapon systems. And I also, as an intel officer, understood and had to do threat analysis of targets. And right now our system, we are failing by continuing to have our schools and some of our most vulnerable locations as soft targets. And we have to make sure that we harden those targets. And the emotional argument counter to that is going to be something along the lines of we don't want a military state in our schools. But I'm telling you, as in my family with 4 children growing up on DOE schools where they were about the most secure you can get in the world, we never once had to worry about any sort of firearms on our schools. And our kids were completely transparent to it because you can do it in a safe and transparent way. You can make sure that your kids are safe at school. And so the very first thing you do is not an immediate change to the entire culture, because that takes a long time to do, but is right now make sure that our schools are not an easy target for our children. Our children are safe. And then we can talk about some of those longer term solutions to try to help change the culture. Because we have a culture problem in America, not just a gun problem, we have a culture problem in America.
Having grown up in this state my whole life, I know about the gun culture of this state. And I would assume that anyone that owns a firearm that I know knows how to use it. So it's stellar that one has been trained to train others. I trained my sons how to use our firearms safely, and we've not had an accident with ours. That's not going to fix the problem in this nation. We have a mental health problem that needs to be addressed. So again, that goes back to health care, ensuring the physical and mental health of everyone in this nation from birth to death. After the Las Vegas shooting, we had bipartisan support on something as simple as bump stocks. So again, we needed to make that first step, and then it died away. Thoughts and prayers, now is not the time to think about it, and then it went away. And then we had Parkland. And it took the high school students of this nation to bring activism to a level, and unfortunately now we don't hear as much about the Parkland shooting. The asinine administration came up with the idea of arming teachers to try to prevent school shootings. Again, I know how to safely handle a firearm. I didn't have to have military training to learn how to safely handle a firearm. But as a teacher with 33 students in my classroom, arming me is not the easiest way or even the smartest way to try to protect our students. As soon as I heard the president throw that out there, the pessimistic side of me was already thinking, all right, which arms dealer does he already have an agreement with to arm all these teachers? So we need to have serious conversations. We have to write legislation that begins to address the issue, but it is a culture problem, and it's going to take someone that has grown up in this state in the gun culture to solve these problems for Georgia's 3rd Congressional District. Thank you.
Mr. Edward?
Thank you. So some of the legislative solutions we can have in the short term. We can repeal the Dickey Amendment, which prohibits us from studying gun violence. This needs to be repealed. We can also update our national gun trace system. Right now, the men and women working hard on that are working with the latest and greatest in microfiche technology. They are not allowed to use computers to help the FBI and local police departments solve gun crimes by tracing weapons down. We need to bring our law enforcement into the modern age. We need to shed the fear that we have that somehow allowing people to efficiently find criminals is going to infringe on our Second Amendment rights. But let's talk about the long term. Mr. Singleton and I work in the airline industry. we don't have a lot of shootings at the airport. And that's because we don't allow weapons at the airport. If you want to talk the long-term solution, we're going to have to change our culture so that we do not live in constant fear and do not feel that we need to arm ourselves everywhere we go.
Mr. Zingley?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's right. We don't let weapons, besides all the armed air marshals and the FBOs, which are airline pilots, I fly with them all the time that are armed. So we do have significant armed defense in the airline industry, which he knows, but and most of the armed guards at the airport as well, but they are definitely not soft targets. Look, our founders told us when they wrote the Constitution that we were going to be most likely to give up our liberty for security. Security is something that we hold very dear in our country. And Ben Franklin said that anyone who's willing to give up their liberty for the security deserves neither. And I believe that we have to just think, we have to take the emotion out of it, we have to think about that, is that when we start talking about giving up our liberties, there's stuff you can do that can prevent some of the stuff, and if we can have reasonable conversations, we can talk about that don't infringe on your liberty. So I am in support of talking about things that don't infringe on your liberty. And remember, in my time as a soldier, the only way to defeat an armed attacker is an armed defender.
Mr. Oliver?
I'd just like to stress that we, again, need to avoid terms like gun control, because that implies that Democrats want to go door to door and take guns away from people. Again, I own firearms. We need common sense gun legislation, because I assure you, I will be the last one to try to go door to door in rural Georgia and take guns away from someone with a posted no trespassing sign on their yard. So again, we have to stay away from that rhetoric and have conversations. And again, it's going to take people who know the people of this district. I had the privilege at a post-Parkland march against violence of brokering an argument between someone who participated in that march against violence and someone who is a staunch Second Amendment right person, and I brought them together and made them understand each other's side. And that's what it's going to take. That just exemplified how I can represent you in the U.S. House of Representatives.
All right, thank you. We are going to enter into a different phase. We're going to allow for some questions from the audience. So if you would like, the acoustics at McIntosh in this auditorium are wonderful, and you can belt it out. But I also will be walking around with a microphone, so if you'd like to do it that way, then that's fine. We also have some microphones up top, too. Oh, you can bring them down. So if you'd like to come down, or if you feel more comfortable asking questions.
Not everybody at once. Yeah, one down front here.
Question for Mr. Singleton in regards to what Mr. Oliver said before. What do you plan to do in regards to gun modifications, such as bump stocks and high containers with guns? And is that also infringement on the amendment rights?
No, bump stocks, I don't know any, we've got a bunch of gun stores too, and I don't know anyone that even uses bump stocks. And I think the percentages of people who use them are such an astronomically low number that it's almost humorous that we talk about that. High capacity magazines, by the way, they only increased in their sales once there was the 10-year ban on automatic weapons and the heavier firearms. And that's why we didn't see, over the time, we didn't see a reduction in gun violence. We saw a reduction in the amount of those firearms that were banned being used, but they were exactly correlated, placed with higher capacity magazines, small arm weapons. And you actually saw an increase in violent crime using guns in that time period. So it's just, you got to be careful. The statistics could be manipulated to any one of the points that we wanted. Okay? This is why it's such an emotional topic, which is why, to me, I always try to simplify it as much as I can, which is what we're doing a violation of the constitutional rights that are granted to us by the Constitution? If it's not, then we can have a conversation like bump stocks. I'm willing to have that conversation. If it is a violation of your constitutional rights, then I don't support it. And really, then it would pass to the states, and the states have the ability just to try to legislate that, and they can pass the local government, which is the way that our founders intended it. I hope that answers your question.
Rebuttal. Okay. Again, no offense, Mr. Singleton, but I don't care how astronomically low the statistics are. To the 500 and some odd people that were murdered that night in Las Vegas, the sale of one bump stock was pretty darn important.
again, if we can come to an agreement on something, begin the conversation. Whether it's something astronomically, if it's so astronomically low, then there should not be any discussion about it. Let's go ahead and pass that and make a step. Let's prove to these children that we as leaders are willing to go and do something about a problem that is existing in this nation. High capacity magazines to legally hunt in Georgia, unless you can only have a 5-round capacity. And if you want to take your AR-15 to the gun range, and it's too much of a hassle for you to change out after every 5 rounds, I'm sorry. I'll try to find money to buy you extra magazines to load. But 30-round magazines, 50-round magazines, and bump stocks are something that we can legislate now and prevent mass murders. Thank you.
I think that was a great rebuttal. I just don't know who he's rebutting. Because I thought it made it clear that I support getting rid of bump stocks, and I don't think we need those, and that's why it doesn't make sense. It's something that's a non-issue. I would agree with you.
There's no one on this stage who thinks that we need bump stocks.
Right.
All they are is a workaround around a specifically worded portion of the Federal Firearms Act that restricted machine guns. What we need to do if we want to solve these problems is we need to elect people who have a history of working in the federal government, who have a history of being in a business where every word matters, and who can draft that strong legislation that prevents loopholes. We want to talk about high-capacity magazines. That's going to be something that we're going to have to restrict. We're going to have to ban. But it can't be just something where, oh, we're going to taper down the numbers of magazines you can sell. You're going to have to taper that with a buyback program. This is going to be expensive, but it's going to save lives, and it's something that we need to be willing to do.
And if we're going to solve these problems, we can't just assume we know what other people think because of their party. You have to listen to what they're saying and the answers that they're giving and know where they really stand. These are hard issues that we're talking about.
Okay. Hi, so my question is for everyone. And over the past 30 years, pharmaceutical companies and researchers have been coming out of the antibiotics research, and they haven't been funding them as much. And so because of that, we're not producing as many antibiotics as we used to. So now bacteria such as E. coli, staph, and strep are becoming resistant, and they're now forming superbacteria. And so in the next 20 to 30 years, we will all be vulnerable to these superbacteria. And what do you plan to do about this? Because 2 million people each year are becoming infected with these superbacteria, and over 23,000 are dying.
So I'll start, because I have no idea. And that's the first time I had ever heard about superbacteria. And I wish I could give you some really fancy platitude, but I have no idea, and I'm going to look into it. But I do appreciate you are smarter than me in that question.
We were talking about this in my microbiology class.
It was a few days ago before I took microbiology.
And if you could just look up some really good documentaries on YouTube, they're really informative. And 20, 30 years can go by really fast. And pretty soon we'll all be vulnerable. And to me, that's really important.
Is your teacher here?
No.
Extra credit. Make sure. Sorry, let's go ahead.
You're good. So, with the pharmaceutical industry, one of the things we need to do is we need to reduce the stranglehold that they have on medicine. There are aspects, there was a portion of the Affordable Care Act, some of the fixes that allows them to pay for out-of-pocket costs for name brand drugs. This sounds great on paper, but what it actually let the pharmaceutical companies do is increase cost total. It's just now being paid for the insurers instead of by the customer. We need to rein in the pharmaceutical industry, and we need to take the lead on research. We can't simply pawn off scientific research to the for-profit pharmaceutical industry. We have to take on that burden as the federal government. We have to increase funding, because yes, we do have MRSA and all sorts of new superbugs that are coming. And as we know with antibiotics, people are lazy, people don't take the full course. That's what's part of it has been helping contributing to it. So if we can focus on the research side of it from the federal side, to put that research to public use instead of simple for-profit use, if there is a solution, we can find it.
As the token science nerd on the stage, and having taught microbiology, I understand the superbacteria, and it is scary. And as I referenced earlier, this is a global issue. So we need to look at global research. We need to see where these microorganisms are evolving, and we need to ensure that as we need to restore our nation not only in terms of just diplomacy, but again, as a leader in protecting the health of the world. But we need to commit more money to research, and we need to prevent Big Pharma from running Congress like they are. Pfizer, for example, your question was about antibiotics, but Pfizer, for example, withdrew funding and research on an Alzheimer's drug just because it wasn't cost effective to them anymore. And with our aging population, that to me was just horrendous. So we need to take Big Pharma out of Congress, their influence, their lobbying, and we do need to commit more money to research. We need more students like you to take microbiology and major in biology, especially people who may not think that science is their thing. But yes, it is scary, and we do need to commit more money to research.
So since I didn't answer because I didn't have any idea what you're talking about, I'm going to use 30 seconds to say I finally agree with Rusty on something, so we can end now. So look, he's 100% right about getting Big Pharma and the lobbyists out. So I believe 100% in campaign finance reform, and I know you didn't talk about that, but I doubt we will today. But I know we came up here that's pledged no PAC money, no lobbyist money, no special interest money, because I believe that the election belongs to the people. You know, my Republican opponent, he's not here to tell you why, but over 95% of all of his donations are all from PACs and super PACs. He's completely funded by these lobbyist organizations. And you see that in the way that he legislates. There's a reason he legislates the way he does, because it doesn't match what he campaigns on, but he legislates 100% in line with where he's getting his money. And so just be an educated voter and understand the way that impacts you. I agree with Rusty on that.
I have a question for Mr. Enderlin. Sorry. You mentioned that you don't allow weapons in airports. Do you think that airport level security belongs in a school setting? And where do you think the trade-off lies between privacy and security?
Airport level security is a little extreme for a toddler coming into school. We don't need to be invasively patting down people, especially a 10-year-old or they're coming into grade school. The point though is that with airports and with military bases, we restrict the use of weapons. We lower the number of weapons on board. Before we went into the Chow Hall in Afghanistan, we made sure we didn't have any weapons loaded. We were carrying them, we cleared them, made sure they were safe. We had a captain who didn't do that properly. And he had to stand before the commanding general and explain why he should be allowed to stay on deployment instead of being sent home immediately. So the trade-off between privacy and security is really, it gets simpler when we simply reduce the number of weapons that people have, when we reduce that desire of people to own guns, and that comes from having a safe society, from having a society where people feel like they can work hard and take care of their family, and from having a society where people, quite frankly, don't feel threatened by anybody who's just a slightly different shade of skin color than they are.
You know, I think you kind of pointed out, and then Rusty can go to Fiesta too, but I like everything you just said, and all those environments you just talked about are very safe environments, and there are trained armed personnel all around. He's right, we don't chamber a magazine, and I've sent one of my soldiers to Import CG. That negligent discharge is a big deal. But they're safe, secure environments because they are trained armed professionals. And that's how you don't create a soft target. So hope is not a course of action. Hoping that you've gotten all of the bad guys and all of the bad guns and that they're going to stay away and be nice is not a course of action to solve a problem.
I don't think there's an easy fix to this. With 300+ million people in this nation, if someone is determined to carry out a mission, unfortunately, most of what we do and see is a knee-jerk reaction to that. We can't ever anticipate every possible thing that can go wrong. If you look at Sandy Hook, they had a buzz-in system, and the person simply shot out the glass and went into that school and murdered those children. So there is a line between security and privacy, and I would err on the side, especially for children, on the side of security. We have a school resource officer in my school, every school that I've worked at. It's a deterrent, but again, arming teachers is not the way to do it. Turning schools into prisons is not the way to do it either. It's a conversation that we have to have.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Oliver. I believe the Coweta Charter Academy gets about $700 per student, and which is significantly less than the public schools, and they're outperforming the schools in Coweta County. And I'm just wondering how more money poured into the public schools, how will that help when there's evidence of charter schools doing that all over the country?
Well, again, funding for schools goes down to the district level, starts at the state and then goes to the school district. So that, we have 13 counties in our district, so the funding for each school district is based on what the school board in Coweta County and the other respective counties decide. $700 per student is a tremendous output, considering that the average student in Georgia, I think, is somewhere around $14,000 spent per student. I would assume that there are criteria to get into that school. Anyone can get it, okay. And
it's not half of what the other students in Coweta County get.
yeah, it's actually significantly less than that. And I'm sorry, I missed the bottom line of your question.
You were saying earlier about that our public schools need more money to perform better. The question that she asked about how our education was, lower compared to the rest of the world on 39, I think she said. And I think one of your answers, part of the answer was that we funded our schools with more money, that they would perform better. I'm just saying that we have charter schools all over the country that are outperforming public schools, and they're getting less money.
Okay, if I said that, I misspoke, or I don't remember saying that. I just remember saying that Betsy DeVos was a horrible Secretary of Education. Okay. Funding, we need equitable funding for every student in this nation. I'll just leave it at that. Every student learns at a different level. Every student needs to be taught differently. Students have special needs. Gifted students, their needs need to be addressed as well. So again, we can't put a price tag generically on the 150 million students in this nation. But what we can do is ensure at the federal level that the states are spending federal dollars the way that they are allocated to those states. And then from there, again, it's dependent on the states dispersing those monies to the individual counties, and then again, it gets out of the federal dollars, or federal, out of legislative hands. So the Coweta Charter Academy, it's a public education system where the $700 from the state is the only funding they get, right, per student? Okay. What we need to do is we need to take the lessons from that and apply them to our public schools. If you've got a great public charter school that is working and doing great things, you shouldn't look at it and go, well, okay, let's see what's going on. No, we take it and we apply those lessons to it. We're going to need to increase some of the funding, though. We're going to need to increase teacher salaries to make it competitive, to make it a career field that people look at and go, yeah, I can repay these student loans. Part of the money that we're going to have to pour back into education is going to be in those student loan forgiveness programs, not just for teachers or people with STEM degrees, but for anybody with a degree that they are putting to good use in the public sector. If we've got exemplary public schools, we need to take those lessons and apply them to the rest of the public schools as best we can. But going back to the other basic problem, if it's a private institution, it shouldn't receive any federal or any public dollars.
So it's such an interesting, I'm so glad you brought that example up. I try very hard not to just use negative slander against people or the party or anything like that. I mean, I really do think that the gentleman here next to me, they want the best for our country. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that things work. And when you talk about, when you bring up specific examples like that, that's when the platitudes break down, and the ideological talk about we want to do all these great things and spend all this money to do this stuff. You can't apply that with federal legislation. You cannot have the discernment to apply that at the local level. It's not possible. And then just to take the things that are great about the Charter Academy, it's not like there's a federal agency that's going to come in and pull those back up and apply them nationally. And even if they did, which is impossible, even if they did, it doesn't mean that it would work the same. A Charter Academy in Harris County is going to have different needs and a different culture than a Charter Academy in South Los Angeles County. So you have to understand that the best way to do what you're talking about, and by the way, the states need to have the authority to say that equitable and equal is not the same thing. A student in inner city Atlanta may require $13,050 per student to get them to where we need them to be, and a student in Coweta County may only need $1,000, right? So making sure that everyone gets an equal amount of money doesn't make sense either. It's making sure that we provide the opportunities. Those decisions have to be made at the local level. They cannot be made at the federal level.
Mr. Singleton, you mentioned that you'd be in favor of campaign finance reform, and you specifically mentioned the impact of PACs and interest groups on the passage of legislation. What specifically do you advocate for in regards to campaign finance reform, and do you agree with the Supreme Court's majority decision that PACs and super PACs funded by interest groups are protected by the Freedom of Expression Clause of the First Amendment?
Absolutely not. The Supreme Court was 100% wrong. Okay. The big PAC money is not freedom of speech. I'm going to give a specific example to me. I'm a member of ALPA. I know you probably remember ALPA too. Okay, it's the pilots union. I guarantee you that he did not decide to donate $10,000 to my opponent. Right? Well, we pay dues to ALPA. Okay, so they're going to use the freedom of speech clause. I do not feel like my freedom of speech was properly executed by ALPA. Okay, it's a fundamental flaw with the concept of these big corporations. Not only that, I'm a firm believer that the American people should run the election system, right? That's who we're running to support. I'm not running to support the Chamber of Commerce. I'm not running to support Delta Airlines, even though I love them. I'm not running to support these big corporations. I'm running to support you. So your vote, you're limited by federal election law to $2,700 per election, which is a lot of money for some of us. It's a lot of money for me. So we're limited to that. George Soros, or you can a Koch brother, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle, who's got multi-millions that they're donating to specific campaigns, that means that their voice is going to be heard louder than yours. Okay, that is not a democratic republic. Okay, that's how you end up with a banana republic, which we won't get into that. So absolute campaign finance reform. And by the way we do campaign finance reform is when gentlemen like me spend $20,000 in an election, 100% grassroots, and I don't take any of that money, and I go and I beat a big party, big money politician like Drew Ferguson, then all of a sudden everybody in Washington wakes up because it shocks the system. It's the same as whether you like President Trump or not. The big miracle last election cycle was not President Trump winning the general election against Hillary Clinton. The big miracle was President Trump winning the primary election. It had never been done and nobody thought it could happen, and it shocked the system. And what he proved is that the American voter has the exact same amount of authority and power in the election process as someone who the big money politicians tell you it's $1,127 to get that vote. Okay, that's what he did. That's why we need campaign finance reform.
I agree with Mr. Singleton 100% that Citizens United was the wrong decision. If you need a humorous takedown of it and a good explainer, Stephen Colbert did a Colbert hack a few years ago and effortlessly destroyed the law and showed the many flaws that have and how that corrupts our election system. If we want to give the power back to the people, we have to do a couple things. We have to increase public financing of education so that politicians like us can go around and talk to people and not have to spend the majority of our time on the phone begging for money so that we can send out mailers or just pay the qualifying fees or all of the other expenses that go along with the campaign. But if we really want to increase our democratic participation, we need to take a look at how we vote. And the most proven way to increase participation is with universal mail-in ballots. They use this in Oregon to great effect. Almost 80% of voters participate in Oregon because they get a ballot, they fill it out at home, and they drop it in the mailbox. Or if they don't get in the mailbox in time, they just bring it down to their local elector office and drop it in the box there. Doing this would increase transparency, create a paper trail, increase voter participation, and at the federal level, we can encourage states to adopt this system by offering to pay for elections that utilize universal write-in ballots.
We need to end Citizens United, and back when I first started running my campaign, I was endorsed by a group out of Atlanta called Voice for All Georgia. I was the first candidate they endorsed, and they are focused solely on voters' rights, transparent elections, paper ballots, and again, running a true grassroots campaign. It is difficult
to do what candidates do. I think it is obvious when the three people you see before you have at least sat together at least thrice, and Drew Ferguson does the courtesy of reading from a teleprompter for us while he sits upon hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thousands of those, when you look up, come from friends of Paul Ryan. And then you look at his voting record, and it is lock, stock, and barrel with Paul Ryan. And before I even started my campaign, I was already representing you. Because as a constituent, every time Drew Ferguson cast a vote, I would Facebook message him, call, email, and ask, why did you vote that way? How did that help the people of the 3rd District? And of course, I never got a response. So if I'm fortunate enough to win your vote, then I will come back and hold town halls and be held accountable, because we'll get campaign finance reform done, and if I'm not doing the job, you'll vote me out the next cycle.
I don't remember for a lot of rebuttals on answers, but I'm going to.
You haven't followed the rule yet. Also,
I know, I just do what it's crazy. So I just thought it was funny. Chuck made me laugh a little bit, when he somehow managed to spend more government money in his answer to campaign finance reform. But the only problem with mail-in ballots, there are some funny, interesting ballots, but the one problem with mail-in ballots is the incumbent has to die before you can beat them, because most voters that don't educate themselves always vote the incumbent. So there are some pitfalls to some of those things, so we just got to be careful.
So the sound of silence that we have as the air conditioning went off. So I'd like to do a couple more just quick questions. So if you're going to ask a question, do it quickly, because it's going to get hot in here. And we've got one over here, one over here, and then, candidates, if you can kind of be as brief as possible too, because I know you have things to do as well.
I actually really want you to be very quick about this answer, but I'd like to hear from all three of you on where you stand on abortion. If you are pro or anti-choice, and literally less than 30 seconds, if you're pro-choice, are there restrictions around how you feel?
I'm not a woman, I'm not a doctor, so it is not my place to tell a woman what she can or cannot do with her body. I don't think anyone in this room is pro-abortion. We can limit the number of abortions in this nation with sex education, with free contraceptives to young people, and that will lower the number of abortions. You can put it on the wall, you can change the constitutional amendment, but you will never end abortions. But again, from day one, you can go back and watch the film. From day one, my answer was, I'm not a woman and I'm not a doctor, and I will be the last person to legislate what a woman can do with her body.
Oh, it's brave to allow women doctors to legislate what women will do with their bodies. I'm strongly pro-choice, and if you go and look up pro-choice groups like voteprochoice.us, they've taken a look at both candidates, and they've decided that I'm the better pro-choice candidate for you.
Well, they're both violently pro-choice, but I'm pro-life. I'm the only candidate in the race that's been endorsed by the Georgia Right to Life. I believe life is a conception. And I also know that life is both in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution in 2 different places. It's something that the federal government is, by Constitution, responsible for protecting, and I believe in protecting life.
And I'll just say anyone can go to that website and fill out that questionnaire to earn that endorsement.
Georgia Right to Life? That's
either one.
Right.
Oh, no, the one you're talking.
No, the recommended candidate status is actually correct. They looked at both of us and said, Chuck.
My question is to Mr. Enderling. You mentioned a program of feeding children breakfast, lunch, and dinner if they're hungry. I don't think anyone wants to see a child go hungry, but how do you plan to pay for that?
The same way we pay for all of the issues we have. We heard Mr. Ferguson talk about how we have this explosive national debt because he decided not to deal with it. The way you deal with it isn't by cutting programs. The way you deal with it is by asking those at the very top to finally give their fair share instead of putting it on the backs of the working class, and to ask corporations to finally pay the taxes that they owe.
This question goes to all candidates. Do any of you support legislation that would protect Robert Mueller and the special counsel until his findings are brought before Congress?
Yes, we need to support. Do we support him? Is that the question?
Yes, that legislation should have already been passed. Democrat or Republican, if a special counsel has been appointed to investigate something, that person should be able to carry out that investigation and all the threads and every tangential thread that has come up has been validated by a federal judge appointed by President Trump. So yes, it needs to be protected by legislation.
Yes, I would support legislation to protect Robert Mueller. That investigation needs to come to its conclusion, and the results need to be released to the American people, whatever they are.
Yeah, I think we should protect the special counsel, and I would say that we need to open up an additional special counsel to see some of the previous administration's unlawful deeds. But I do believe you need to let due process go on and make sure that it's due process equally. It shouldn't be fair parts of politics. It should be due process.
Okay, really quickly, if your kid were to hit another kid with a stick, would you take the stick away, or would you give all of the other kids sticks too?
Well, my older son is a junior at UGA, so he and I would have a conversation, so I would take his stick away and his funding for UGA away. My younger son is a junior in high school, and I would take his stick away as well as put him to work in the yard for the days that he would be suspended for his stick hitting at school.
My kids aren't old enough to work, but we take the stick away and we put them in timeout.
Yeah, I'd probably spank my kid if he was hitting someone. I'd probably say that. If he was hitting someone else, and I'd figure out where he got the stick from. Did he pick it up on the ground, or did he get it? I know that's not that good analogy.
Do you believe that's a gun control?
That analogy?
Yeah.
Sure, of course you can.
I believe what she's trying to say is that if the problem is that people are shooting people, is the problem that we need to give more guns to people, or is the problem that perhaps we should have less guns? We all agree with the stick analogy that we need to have less weapons.
Yeah, I mean, that depends on if you're going to do an analogy that's not a false equivalence. I mean, I think analogies are a valuable resource, but it can't be a false equivalence. So the child in your scenario probably didn't go to a store and legally purchase a stick to then go back and hit other children with. The child probably got it off the ground, which legislation on the stick-bearing age and the size of stick he can have would not have affected his ability to unlawfully obtain the stick from the back of the yard. So analogies are useful, but you can't do a false equivalence.
Yes, we're
Or in trouble. You don't have a stick.
It's the secret. The bags are all sticks.
We would like to thank everybody for coming to our student-led forum tonight. We would especially thank Mr. Enderlin, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Singleton for coming to our forum. And we would also like to thank McIntosh faculty, including Mr. Pinkston, Mr. Singleton, Mr. Yarbrough, and Mr. Buswell for helping us set this thing up.
We would also like to give a big thanks to our club sponsors, Mr. Keenest, Mr. Colvin, and Mr. Abel. Also, we would like to thank Jack Vaughn and Ryan Fritz for publicizing this event.
We'd like to give a big shout out to Cole Finnerty and Cole Pickering for setting up the lights and microphones. And also a big thank you to Owen Lucid, Shane Caravanda, and Jacob Daly for working our cameras. And of course, Sam Pan for working our Facebook Live. Thank you.
We also have these little gifts for you guys. They're stuffed animals. This is for you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you for coming out tonight. We have refreshments in the auditorium lobby, and you can meet them. Thank you.